The first reading of today concerns the planetary boundary for greenhouse gases. Let me briefly motivate why I included McGlade Ekins. During my undergraduate studies in Rotterdam, I took a course in environmental economics as well, where I remember part of the required literature being dedicated to the concern of peak oil. The following paper by McGlade Ekins shows that the abundance of fossil fuels rather than their pending scarcity gives the most urgent concern. The starting point for this paper is a global carbon budget of allowable emissions until 2050 estimated by Meinhausen et al. And Clark et al. McGlade and Ekins write, it has been estimated that to have at least a 50% chance of keeping warming below 2 degrees Celsius throughout the 21st century, the cumulative carbon emissions between 2011 and 2050 need to be limited to around 1100 gigatons of carbon dioxide. Here we use a single integrated assessment model that contains estimates of the quantities, locations, and nature of the world's oil, gas, and coal reserves and resources, to explore the implications of this emissions limit for the fossil fuel production in different regions. McGlade and Ekins present estimates of global stocks of fossil fuels and subsequently explore the geographical distribution of what they argue to be the cost-minimizing set of reserves that can be burned to stay within this global carbon budget. McGlade and Ekins continue, a variety of metrics with disparate nomenclature are relied upon to report the availability of fossil fuels, but the two most common are resources and reserves. In this work, resources are taken to be the remaining ultimately recoverable resources, the quantity of oil, gas, and coal remaining that is recoverable over all time with both current and future technology, irrespective of current economic conditions. Their figure illustrates that the emissions embedded in known resources is about an order of magnitude larger than the allowable emissions to have a coin flip probability to stay within 2 degrees Celsius warming. Reserves are a subset of resources that are defined to be recoverable under current economic conditions and have a specific probability of being produced. And to further illustrate that the abundance of fossil fuels rather than their scarcity gives problems first, the greenhouse gas emissions contained in present estimates of global fossil fuel reserves are around 3 times higher than this global carbon budget. To give a bit more detail, Jacob and Hilaire describe McGlade and Ekins their work as follows. In each of the 16 regions modeled, fossil fuels are divided into 21 categories that include various types of coal, oil, and gas. Each category further accounts for key characteristics such as recoverable resources, production and trade cost, as well as natural decline rates of production, the rates of fall that would occur in the absence of any further investment. McGlade and Ekins, their results suggest that globally a third of oil reserves, half of gas reserves, and over 80% of current coal reserves should remain unused from 2010 to 2050 in order to meet the target 2 degrees Celsius. Their results table presents a more detailed account of unburnable reserves based by region. I will briefly comment on the table, but first let us move to the conclusions of McGlade and Ekins. To conclude, these results demonstrate that a stark transformation in our understanding of fossil fuel availability is necessary. Although there have previously been fears over the scarcity of fossil fuels, in a climate-constrained world, this is no longer a relevant concern. Large portions of the reserve base and an even greater portion of the resource base should not be produced if the temperature rise is to remain below 2 degrees Celsius. While the cost-minimizing set of unburnable reserves gives a criterion that seems relatively objective, It need not be optimal, and you can easily see how the resulting geographical distribution of these unburnable reserves is politically sensitive. For example, an objective to keeping 85% of African coal unburned invites several environmental justice questions. The popular framework of donut economics by Kate Raworth combines the planetary boundary framework with a social foundation to set the scope for policy. We will come back to this theme of a social foundation for climate policy in the third week. For now, we will continue with the second reading of today.